Welcome to the Seven Things EMS podcast, a continuing education offering of Limmer Education. Seven Things EMS podcast is designed to give you what you need to succeed in EMS. It's conversational, informational, and without the fluff. All right, and welcome to a Seven Things EMS podcast. I'm your host, Dan Limmer. When I started this Seven Things series, I don't think I could have imagined that I would be able to have a conversation as timely and relevant, as important as the one that you're going to listen to today. This Seven Things EMS is about the National Registry of EMTs, about some of the history and facts about the National Registry to build a foundation, and then we're going to roll into the current issue, the new board resolution, which is on a lot of people's minds. And there's no one better to hear it from than my two guests today, Dr. Kevin Mackey, the chair of the board of the National Registry, and National Registry Executive Director, Bill Seifarth. I'd like to welcome you both here today.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having
us. Thank you, Dan. Glad to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
All right. Our mantra here in Seven Things is to not have any fluff. I'm sure that we could tell war stories or exam stories or a lot of things, but I think this is about getting to it. And I think the first couple really are going to set the stage and I think clear up some misconceptions about the National Registry before we get down to business and the last several things that we do. And we're going to talk about the National Registry and what it is and what it does. And I got to tell you, one of the things I'm looking at some of your notes here, and one of the most common things I hear from people that are angry, and I think you guys are very easy to be angry at sometimes, but I think the work that you do personally is very important and done very professionally. One of the common things people say is, "Oh, they're just looking for money." You know, it's a money thing, but I think you're going to tell us something that's dramatically different than that.
That's right, Dan. First of all, again, thank you for the opportunity to chat. And the National Registry, we have a long-standing tradition since 1970, which is when we were established. We are an independent, not-for-profit, a nonprofit organization that focuses on the assessment of competency of EMS practitioners and EMS candidates. As over 50 years old, our mission as the National Registry is what we like to say is to protect the public, but it is focused on ensuring that we accurately measure competency at the entry level so that there's safe and effective practice for EMS practitioners. And then we ensure continued competency throughout the EMS practitioner's career. So we are a nonprofit. We are focused on our mission of protecting the public, and we've been doing so since 1970.
And you, as a director in the National Registry itself, has a board of directors, a very wide-ranging board of directors that oversees the activities of the registry.
Yeah, we do, Dan. So as Bill alluded to, we're a 501c3 nonprofit, but we do have a board of directors that is made up of 22 directors. Wow. And what a lot of folks don't know, and it's a large board, I know, is what a lot of folks don't realize is that a lot of national EMS organizations nominate the directors that sit in spots for them on the board, and this is in our bylaws. So just to give you an example, some of the organizations are NAEMT, NSEMSO, IEFC, AAA, pediatricians, ACEP, NAMSP, and NEMSI as well. And then probably what a lot of folks wouldn't know is and it's unusual for a board, is we have two members on our board that aren't even connected to EMS. There are public members at large. So they actually have no connection to EMS. And in my time on the board, they tend to provide a perspective that we wouldn't otherwise think of. And so we're just very blessed to have the individuals that we have on our board, and they come from wide ranges of backgrounds too. We've got educators, we've got state officials, we've got medical directors, we've got employers. So we have a very broad, talented group of individuals. And and also highly educated too. Many PhDs on our board, several MDs as well. So we're lucky. We've got a large board, but they're very talented, and they come from a vast variety of avenues through EMS.
It's certainly listening to that, and I think you explained it very passionately, shows that it's not a vacuum or a mysterious thing or an ivory tower. That there are representatives truly of everyone on the board. I think that's really good. Now, you talked about competency verification. That brings us, I think, squarely into point number two, that competency verification. Obviously, Bill mentioned that that's what you do, not only the safety of the public, but that competency and continued competency over time. But I think that, again, this isn't necessarily the vacuum that people assume it is, that you are a part of a bigger system. I think that's, we talked about four major areas of competency verification. It's not just you, is it?
That's right. It's truly a systems approach. And, the 2019 EMS scope of practice model identified four elements related to competency. And that is certainly the educational program, education in general, certification, which is our swim lane, what we do, licensure and local credentialing. So those are the four elements. As it relates to education, um, that is the education. That's the foundational element that is offered to EMS candidates, to students. And the registry's role, we don't regulate nor do we approve training programs. That's not in our swim lane. That's not our scope. It's not what we do. It's not our expertise. Rather, the training program regulation oversight is primarily fulfilled by the state EMS offices. For EMR, for EMT and advanced EMT, there are ways in which the state offices will have the oversight of those programs and ensure that minimum standards are met and that quality education is met. Currently, for paramedic, CAHAP, paramedic programs are a requirement for all candidates that are sitting for National Registry examination, and that's been in place since 2013. An alternative to that, in addition to getting CAHAP accreditation, is that there is a letter of review that is issued by the co-AMSP, and that was put in place subsequent to 2013. But since 2013, for paramedic graduates to sit for our exam, it is a requirement that they graduate from an accredited program or a program with a letter of review. For EMT, EMR, and advanced EMT, they have to be state approved.
And
The
that was a
education
big thing at the time when
was
that decision was made. We were all around then. That was, I don't want to call it the shot heard around the world, but it was a big step to require that, and not without a lot of discussion in doing that.
That's correct. There was considerable input that certainly went into that decision in the evolution or progression of the profession to institute that requirement, and that went into effect. It was announced in 2007 and 2008, but it went into effect in 2013. And education programs I think play as a systems approach a really important role of providing that formative education, but also they assess the knowledge, skills, and abilities for these EMS practitioners prior to them being able to sit for our examination. And we independently assess their competency, which provides that checks and balance as it relates to certification. Certification, again, that is our role. That's our wheelhouse. That's our expertise, where we can independently measure the competency of the candidates who are sitting for certification. And there's elements related to that certification, eligibility criteria, which in our case is completion of a state approved program and or accredited program. They complete our examination, and then there are recertification requirements. So we view our role as accompanying the EMS clinicians and professionals throughout their journey, both as students and as they prepare to become clinicians and throughout their career. That national EMS certification role that we fulfill allows for consistency in the application of the national standards, and it allows also for that mobility of personnel across state lines. The licensure element is that's the ability to function, or the authorization to function. That's a restricted practice. That's a governmental function that states provide, and often our assessment process is used by states as a requirement to be eligible to be licensed in a state. So we work very closely and in concert with state officials so that our examination can be used as that independent check and assessment of competency before the state will license them and give them the ability to function in their states. And the last element is local credentialing. And Dr. Mackey, as a physician, medical director, I think he's best to speak about that in terms of the role that the local credentialing plays in this systems approach to ensuring that there's protection of the public. So, Dr. Mackey, turn it on over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Bill. So after the individual's gone through the education part, the certification, the licensure, it comes down to the jurisdiction really of the local EMS agency, and often that medical director as well. That is the final step in the process to locally credential individuals to be able to function under the local protocols and the systems that they're operating in. And so this is where it gets right down to, this is the proverbial tree and the forest for the trees. This is the kind of the last step in the process where prior to this, they've gone through all the education, the certification, licensure by the state, and then they come to their local agency. And often it's their medical director that gets involved at that point and establishes and ensures that the knowledge, skills, and abilities that that person has is applicable in that local system.
One of the things that I've said in the past about EMS, and not malicious in any way, just an observation, is that compared to other health professions, if you want to call us that, we're a little bit more immature, where we don't have the years and years, sometimes hundreds of years of experience, say nursing. Do you find that because of that, or even in general, that there's some blurring of those elements that you just said? I think of all these things. One is I'm not sure people understand, but if you take local agencies and others, they may say, "Well, I want the work done for me in education, or I want something else done." I think it's important for people to recognize these containers and the responsibilities in each. Sometimes, though, I think we're blurred a little on that. You've talked twice about your swim lane, the things
Mm-hmm.
that you're in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Bill, I'm sorry, Dan. That's a really, really good point. We've had conversations in our boardroom about what is, Bill's using the word swim lanes, lanes of traffic. We try to stay heavily focused on the things that are directly in our line of responsibility, and to make sure that we don't drift into areas that are not actually part of our responsibility. And so we're very intentional about that. But I agree. I mean, I came from a paramedic background. And I think your average boots on the ground paramedic, and even some of folks involved in leadership, they don't have the optics on these different components, and who is actually responsible for each of these components. That's a really, really good point.
And I'll add one, and that's great, Kevin. And I'll add actually one additional thing. It also highlights the importance of the interdependence among many different elements. Certainly, the educators and the educational programs, us as an independent certification organization to verify the competency, the licensing role that the states play, but then the local role that they play as well. So it's a very comprehensive assessment in this systems approach to ensuring that the those who are certified, those who are licensed, those who are functioning are competent and are safely and effectively functioning in the system where they serve. And it directly aligns, again, with that 2019 EMS scope of practice model, which folks can find at ems.gov on the internet.
I think that we don't rehearse. We just shoot the bull a little bit before we start. But I love when things flow together. So I'm going to just jump on that and say number 3 is we're talking about the National EMS Education Agenda for the Future. Now, having some seniority in life in EMS, I was there for the development. A lot of that actually was at some of the meetings of the scope of practice and different things that came on in the early late 90s and early 2000s.
Mhm.
We talked about the registry and the board. We've talked about the individual components. This point that you bring up now about the National EMS Education Agenda is the part of this conversation that's going to tell people there was a bigger plan that started a long time ago. Matter of fact, in that agenda, it looked as the future as 2010, as I recall. So we're looking at important pieces of the national plan that now dovetail with what we've talked about.
Yeah, and to say it's truly a systems approach, and the EMS education agenda for the future colon a systems approach, which is 23 years old in terms of its age, but that mindset of being a systems approach is certainly was referenced earlier as it relates to the EMS scope of practice document, but really it's been a systems approach and a thought process for several decades. And that document called for several things, one of which was a national EMS certification organization and education standards, as well as accreditation standards to independently assess for the quality of education that's offered, certainly to protect the students, but also in alignment with the systems approach to help to protect the public as well. After that document was published, certainly the National Registry, we focused our efforts primarily and squarely on, as I said earlier, our swim lane, which is the certification role that was outlined in that document. And historically, accreditation has been an important element that was highlighted certainly in the education agenda for the future, but how that came about, I think it's worthy of kind of going down history lane to say how do we get to where we are today, and certainly to where we were 20 some years ago when the education agenda for the future was born. So, Kevin, do you want to highlight the historical overview of how we got to where we are as it relates to the accreditation requirements for paramedic?
Sure. Step back from 1999 to 1978. So you're about 21 years earlier. And you have this thing called the Joint Review Committee on Education Programs for the EMT paramedic. It's a very long term, but it was chartered. And at that point, the National Registry helped to formulate some initial essentials and guidelines for accreditation of educational sites for paramedic. Fast forward a little bit more than a decade, and you have the formation of CAHEP. So CAHEP is the Commission on Accreditation of Allied Health Education Programs. And CAHEP, if you're listening to this and have never heard this term before, is the parent organization for COA, which is the accrediting body for paramedic programs. And in 2000, just after the EMS agenda, about the time the EMS agenda for the future comes out, this initial organization, the JRC-EMTP, which was in 1978, is renamed to COA. So we have the parent organization in 1992. COA is renamed in 2000. And then in 2000, the EMS Education for the Education Agenda for the Future calls for National EMS Education Program Accreditation and National EMS Certification, which is what Bill was just alluding to. Go forward from there to 2006, and you've got the paramedic accreditation effect on paramedic credentialing examination success rates. That was published in the NAEMSP journal, PEC, showing outcome differences between accredited and non-accredited paramedic programs. And then forwarding there, we've already kind of alluded to some of this. In 2007, the National Registry Board took action and voted to require this CAHEP accreditation of paramedic programs beginning in 2013. And then in 2013, you had this begin with also possibility for letter of review. And then finally, 2016, just over 6 years ago, just about 6 years ago, the paramedic program accreditation and individual performance on the National Paramedic Certification Examination was published and shows higher pass rates for accredited programs versus non-accredited programs. So that takes you kind of through some of the history starting in 78, the formation of the initiation of CAHEP, formation of COA, and then the actions taken at the National Registry to codify what came out in the EMS education agenda for the future for certification organization, accreditation organization.
I think that just to put that, the first thing that comes to mind is that this is really the first time we've brought up CAHEP and COA, and if there's another organization that needs some organizational body armor other than the National Registry at times, it certainly would be COA in doing that. But one of the things in the 2000 the Education Agenda for the Future called for accreditation and certification with a solid interrelationship between them, and research that's come out in several times. And I think it's important for listeners here and picking out the important things. I would like to just say one, that this has been announced everything very long in advance. We're talking 40 years, much of this material. And the people that say that there's no research behind it, I think we've said, okay, here's a couple of things that were published in peer reviewed journals. And the nature of this, again, from points 1, 2, and 3, say that this is part of a bigger plan. And I think a lot of people don't realize that from the outside, that there have been thousands and thousands of hours of meetings and
Mhm.
plans and NHTSA documents put out to lead us to the point where we are now.
Yeah, and that's that, Dan. I think tees it up nicely in terms of the history of how we incorporated the requirement certainly for accreditation, but also for certification. And our board of directors recently passed a preliminary, and we're opened up. We're in the middle of public comment period right now, but a draft resolution to think about, perhaps rethink about accreditation requirements. And there's been some concern raised that the agenda for the future, the education agenda for the future, systems approach, it may not be capable of fully addressing some of our current challenges. And that's the reason why our board has said, we've heard some concerns that were raised, and we have this public comment period to say, give us your feedback, give us your input, to make sure that whatever final direction the board takes is aligned with the best interest in the needs of the EMS community, the national EMS community that we serve. So this current comment period gives us that opportunity for that discussion and gives us that opportunity for feedback. And we've received a lot of good feedback. And but before we get into that, I'll turn it over to Kevin. He can talk a little bit about kind of the what decisions or how the board got into the position, certainly of addressing this and subsequently drafting this resolution, which is out for public comment.
And I'll say this is number 4 in our 7 things, the resolution number 13 from 2022. And the what and the whys, I think, people have learned a lot here, but I think now people have moved, Kevin, to the edge of their chair. And we'll turn that over to you.
Thank you again, Dan. This is, if I get asked one question, this is it. It's like, how in the world did we get here? And I think that providing some context for that is going to be helpful for sure. And so here's the context. Over several months, we have heard from our stakeholder partners that they're having challenges for various reasons. And there also were some limited legislative efforts and feedback from local and state organizations. And the expression was for a desire for additional flexibility to address training and personnel needs in several parts of the country. This wasn't just in one location. It wasn't in one part of our country. It was in several parts of our country that we heard this feedback. And so that's where the conversation really started about what other options do we have out there? Is there anything else that we could do? And so we got to work. And this work was not completed in a board meeting. It was worked on over several months to weeks, and so we engaged in a discussion at the boardroom when we thought we had the information we needed to be able to act and create an action and to engage with our stakeholders and with the larger EMS community about what was next and what could we do to help with this challenge that's going on. We engaged in a discussion and talked about several options and proposals. And the board came and felt that the draft resolution was an option to expand the ability of states to develop local solutions. We talked about early on in this podcast that that is already going on at the EMR, EMT, and AMT level. States already make a lot of those decisions about education programs and about what they do with those levels. But we were considering the option of expanding it further. So we recognize, though, and it's abundantly clear that this is going to present substantial challenges. And what I am most pleased about, personally, as a medical director, as a prior EMS professional, is the vigor of the discussion that's going on. This has created a national discussion that is providing a lot of good information and feedback that will be useful to, at the end of this, grow EMS as a profession. And I think we're going to come out of the other side of this stronger. But that's the reason for the comment period, is we are intentionally soliciting input from all of our stakeholders and those who we don't regularly engage with. This is open for everybody to collect as far and wide input prior to any final decision being made. So as a human and as the board chair, I do regret and I recognize that this has created some disruption, and that was never intentional. But we do recognize that and regret that. But we do plan to intentionally, carefully evaluate all of the comments and positions coming in, and we're getting them from individuals, we're getting them from national organizations, we're getting them from employers. All of those are going to be considered. So that kind of gives you a little bit of the background behind the resolution, how it got here, and where we are with it right now.
Well, I think a couple of questions, come up just from me listening to this. I think the first, and you had said that maybe if there was a way to roll things back, you said that that there might be a different way to do it. But I don't think a lot of people, I have to tell you, most of the time people go through their day-to-day business in EMS, and that the process of this resolution and the period of listening and seeking feedback, I think was new to a lot of people. So,
Mhm.
if there's going to be a significant change of any kind at the National Registry, is this resolution process probably done routinely? But people now are saying, "Whoa, wait a minute."
I'm glad you brought that up because we do have public comment periods about any time we have resolutions. So the public comment period is definitely not a new thing. But I think because this particular resolution caught the attention of so many people so fast, but they didn't have a lot of the background information that we did at the board level. That it has created that conversation, and we are very pleased to see that the feedback and the comment period is functioning perfectly. And we have definitely struck a nerve for sure, and we are listening intently, and that is the one take home message out of this, that I just really, many people are going to listen to this have never met me. Some people have met me. I come from a background of integrity, and I intend to make sure that our board is intently focused on what the feedback is and react and respond appropriately to that feedback. This was not a decision that we made and you push it out for a 60-day comment, but we've already made up our mind, right? That's why the
Okay.
word draft appears very clearly across the document. It is a
Bill's
draft.
nodding his head.
Yes, yeah, it is absolutely a draft. I think that the great panic that came in the room initially is when people read this as like a done deal. This is a draft, and this is the reason for a comment period is to hear the public and our stakeholders speak to us about the challenges that this creates, and then work with us to create a more workable solution if it is just insurmountable for some of our stakeholders.
And I think the other thing that I liked is that individuals can respond, and agencies, organizations, national organizations. And that's the part that I've been watching for. And I'm sure you're much more attuned to it than I am. And you have had some um, national feedback. I don't know how much of that you want to get into and what that is as far as the national organizations. But I'd be curious, even if you could direct people to who has given feedback, just so people can look at other organizations that are leadership organizations to look at.
Yeah, we have received feedback. Certainly, this decision, our board met in mid June, and it came right on the heels of the NASEMSO, the National Association of State EMS Officials meeting, which their annual meeting took place in Charleston, South Carolina. So on that Monday, we were able to, following the week following our board meeting, we were able to meet with state officials, and we did certainly receive feedback from the SEMSO and the SEMSO's members, in particular the state directors and other state officials. And there were resolutions that were passed. Certainly, one in opposition to moving forward with this draft resolution, but there were also challenges, I think, to the National Registry to potentially look at our process, and our board is certainly very carefully looking at that, and that's why we have the public comment period, and that's where we look forward to receiving the input from certainly organizations, but equally important from individuals. And we've received a lot of about 800 comments already in our public comment period, and we're methodically looking at them and certainly sharing them with our board of directors, so that when they make a final decision on this, that will be consistent with what is in the best interest of the community, the national EMS community that we serve.
Now, I think what I'll do is number 5 in our points here, actions and feedback. And number 6 is the 60-day comment period. I think we've been kind of mixing that up. So we stay true to our 7 things and also get into some of the things we may have missed from there. Um, I just want to put those out there because we're having good conversation. I don't want to interrupt the flow. I think that feedback is really important. And quite frankly, that is number 5. So, Kevin, what's the board? Obviously, you can't say, well, I would predict, but you could, talk about the process going forward, and maybe when and how it will be published, and um, stakeholders would be notified. Different things like that.
For sure, Dan. So yes, the first thing is consideration of these comments. The board is going to, as I said earlier, carefully consider all of the comments before making final decisions. We're taking input from the entire EMS community, and then we need to take some time to consider what the vocal input has been from the EMS community and how they feel about this, before we make a decision. Now, then the board will come back together and we will meet. We're going to have some optics on some of these things before then. We're planning a couple of iterative board informal, just informational sessions, just to give them some optics on what's coming in, because this is a pretty big thing, and they're going to have to process a lot of information. I'd rather not just lay it on them all at once, but just give them bite-sized things like, this is what we're hearing, these are some of the input that we've had. And so when we come together and it's time to consider all the gravity of everything that we've taken in, we can make an informed decision. And then how to communicate that will come immediately after that board meeting. We have timelines in pencil for when this will happen. You mentioned end of the summer. I think that's a pretty good, accurate estimate about when the board will get back together, and then disseminating the outcome of this resolution will then come quickly after that, because I do know, and I'm sensitive to the fact that as you alluded to earlier, people are kind of on the edge of their seat. They're kind of waiting to hear what's going to come of this. And so we're sensitive to that. We don't want to push this off, but we want to be very calculated, very open, very honest, very transparent, for how we get to the final conclusion that we do. And that is my primary mission as the board chair, is to make sure that process is open and is transparent, and that everyone has clear understanding about how we got here and the voices that spoke that kind of got us to this point.
Are there any comments, any things, anything in this process besides you had talked about, okay, we would have certainly made this different. Anything that surprised you as the board chair? Anything other than that, the fact of the surprise that surprised you as a board chair, or is noteworthy just to throw in here? This is called the open-ended question in medicine.
Right. Um, I think that there have been definitely lessons learned on my part. And I think I could speak for the entire board, but also the executive committee. There's lessons learned about the processes that have been in place at the National Registry for a very long time and the reason for those processes. And although this was calculated after months of feedback from our stakeholders, that the process and the speed and the order of which things were done may have been out of order from what we've done in the past. Um, and I just, as I said earlier, there's been a vigorous conversation. That's the part that's been most exciting to me, is because I think in most public comment periods, and Bill will correct me if I'm wrong, but most public comment periods, we get maybe 75 is a high number public comments on an action the board's taking. And we're Bill just told you we're over 700. Like we're tenfold. So this has definitely created conversation, which has been good. It's very healthy to have these conversations, even if they're uncomfortable. And so that because our whole mission, everyone listening to this, our entire mission is to elevate the EMS profession. That's COA's mission. That's our mission. It's NSEMSO's mission. It's the educators' mission. Like we all have the same mission. So at the end of this whole thing, if we've raised and elevated the EMS profession, even though it was painful at the time we went through it, I can't say that other than I do regret the pain it's caused. I think at the other end, we're going to be stronger.
Some of the comments, and I guess this is where I'm going to get a little bit deep. There seems to be two sides of the equation. The side of the equation that says, hey, listen, we need more people. We think that things are too onerous. We want to introduce legislation to make things easier. Yet you pointed out research that says accreditation gives us better results and that lowering the bar might lower a standard. That resolution doesn't strike me as going to come easy. That no matter what happens, there's going to be a part of the EMS world that's going to do it. Now, I will say that I'm a believer that things tend to evolve and that nothing is going to, destroy EMS. And ultimately, the history book is going to tell us about these things. Any thoughts besides that? Do you see a middle ground, or are things kind of batting around on those edges?
I do see a middle ground. What that middle ground is, I don't know yet. And I think that that's going to be informed after lots of thoughtful discussion and feedback from our stakeholders. There is clearly growth in EMS, as you said, and as we talked about, some of these things that originally formed was formed over 2 decades ago. And EMS changes, right? We have for great example, we have blood medics in New Orleans, right, that are giving whole blood on the streets in New Orleans. That would have been unfathomable just even 3-4 years ago. So EMS is evolving, EMS is changing. I'm not saying that our pillars and our processes that we build EMS on need to change, but we need to be thinking about where EMS is, where it can grow, where it's headed, and the unintentional barriers that are in place to growing that profession, and then question those barriers, if you want to call them barriers or obstacles or well-meaning policies we have that are just hamstringing EMS from growing as a profession. So I'm not saying that that's was the intent of this resolution. That is not. This is an open-ended response to an open-ended question. But it does, the vigor of the conversation has definitely brought into question some of what we've traditionally held for over 2 decades.
All right, I like it. So I think to wrap up 1 through 6, um, this resolution is not carved in stone. You're listening, and people should be sending their comments in via that form on the National Registry site. That open minds are listening, and I think I'd be safe to also say that from talking to you and Bill, that the best interest of EMS and the registry's mission is what's on your mind.
100%. Yeah, we are listening loud and clear, not closed. I heard very early on that, this decision's, the ship's already sailed, the horses left the barn. Nothing could be further from the truth. That's very important. And I told you early on, I build my life on integrity and honesty. That is the absolute truth. There are opportunities here, and we have opportunities as a board to amend and to change resolutions before they go into final form. That's the most important thing.
And you don't think that just by the the pondering this, even whether it's enacted or not, that the horse isn't out of the barn, you think that that you'll go forward and that the mission will be clear.
Absolutely. My goal on the other side of this is to come out with a clear statement about what was said nationally, about how folks felt about this, and so that there's a message attached to the decision, which I think was the learning point out of the first part, is that there was no message attached, so people just really didn't understand where this was coming from, even though we did as a board. I think that the message on the other side of this is going to be very important.
All right, so this number 7, but wait, there's more. More to come from the National Registry was the 7th point that you all put together. And I do think it's important, while we have people's attention, that that there are some other things going on that you're looking to do to better the exam. So hit us with them.
Sure. So I'll take the first, and certainly the National Registry business and our board of directors is not limited to this lively discussion around the modification for accreditation requirement for paramedic programs, but rather we also are excited and quite enthused about our ALS redesign. And you talked about the examination modification. What we're doing is we're adopting emerging and best practices in the testing and certification industry, as well as using data from our recent advanced life support practice analysis that highlighted the importance and need for us to better assess the clinical judgment as it relates to entry-level candidates and individuals who are entering the workforce. So the ALS redesign is doing a series of things, but the biggest to highlight is it focuses on clinical judgment in a different way. And go to our website, again, nremt.org, and just in the search feature, look up the ALS redesign, and you can see the latest and greatest on that, including clinical judgment framework that was published by our psychometrics team, and it was published actually in the pre-hospital emergency care. So you can go to our website and find out more about that. And I'll turn it over to Kevin about some action that was taken by our board as it relates to distributive education for continued competency. Kevin.
Yeah, let me go. Let me just say one thing about that.
Sure.
This part we talked about, Bill. I'm actually excited about some of the things you're doing and ways you're testing. Now, another big thing that the National Registry is talking about is doing away with psychomotor
Mm-hmm.
examinations. And I have to tell you, the response of people sometimes surprises me. People, we said, don't give everybody oxygen. Boy, did we struggle with that. We said, backboards are out. Oh, ding dong, the witch is dead. We're happy with that. And I really thought when people said, hey, no more practical exams, that people would be, hey, great. But I found the people that I've talked to are very split on that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's a little tradition based. I think, I know that there's places, I won't mention anybody, but they say, "Oh, take your exam, take your practical here. It's easier," or there is a certain things you've said, and the practical exam has to go away. How about the response to that? I'm just shocked how desperate, how separate those things are as well.
Yeah, it is certainly the volume of feedback that we've received over the last couple of years leading up to this plan, which for now, we're still having our psychomotor examination, but the intent is to retire the psychomotor examination based on certainly feedback from the public, but also based on what we know a lot more and a lot better as far as how we can more precisely and more comprehensively measure a candidate's entry level abilities with this future examination that we're moving towards. And as it relates to the psychomotor examination, we can better assess and document someone's ability, psychomotor ability, longitudinally rather than a one and done event. So the psychomotor exam, as it is right now, is a one and done, 1 day event versus the student minimum competencies, which is replacing the portfolio in the Appendix G, allows us to, over time, show the progression of proficiency of a candidate. So we are evolving, we're improving, we are taking steps forward to refine how we actually assess and ensure entry-level competencies. So it's for those reasons, rooted in science, that we are excited to advance our ALS exams, and as part of that, retire the psychomotor examination, because we feel that we can do it in better ways and ultimately more comprehensively and precisely measure competency.
All right, very well done. And back to you, Kevin, on the another comment period on the distributive education limits.
Sure. This is one of those we're also in public comment about that came out of our board meeting. We went through this little thing recently called a pandemic,
Oh
which
yeah,
oh yeah, I remember that,
yeah.
whether or not we're in an endemic or not, but we definitely had some lessons learned out of that, and we had to think outside the box. And we went to this distributive education, and we heard some overwhelming majority of the states supported a change to moving to permanently allowing for distributive education. The limits, basically, the limits is what we're removing. We used to have these limits in place for distributive education. We're removing those and allowing distributed education. Also, because working in partnership with CAPCE's, some of the concerns we heard from other organizations were on the quality of the education, which again is not in our lane of traffic. CAPCE oversees a lot of that, and so we've worked. CAPCE has done some work to assure that distributed education is what it says it is. And so through that, we have a resolution before us which removes those distributive education limits. It's supported by an overwhelming majority of the states, but again, we relish people's input and comments on that to hear what others feel about that. If they support it, if they don't support it, and especially the reasons why. That helps us inform a decision.
Not as much talk about that. Maybe not as much for and against, but again, people have the opportunity to comment, and that's important.
Absolutely, and I think we did have more. At least I personally, as a person, not as a board chair, but as a person, heard some concerns about the distributive education. But when CAPCE got involved, all of those concerns went away, which is great. CAPCE is really good at doing what they do.
There's a certain part of this where um, there will always be people who try and go around a system. There'll always be people who don't want to um, go through and make their obligation and make the CE be what it's supposed to be. All right, the last thing in our number 7 is the BLS practice analysis. A lot of people don't realize that the registry on a regular basis looks at BLS and ALS providers and what they do. So, Bill, I think you're going to give us a little bit of insight on that.
Sure, it's another exciting advancement and progression actually with the National Registry. So our exams are written based on what happens in the field. We're not necessarily written or directed by a curriculum, a textbook, but rather a practice
And I
analysis.
have
And
broad shoulders with an EMT textbook. I totally
there we
understand.
go. That's right. That's right. That was not intended to be focused on you, but
No,
I
no,
do
but
say that
people
our
need to
practice
know that.
analysis is important. It's fun. It's this cornerstone on which we build our examination and how we assess competency of our candidates that are presented to us upon successful completion of education programs. The exciting part about this BLS practice analysis is we took some lessons that we learned through our ALS practice analysis, and we've also taken it to a next level where we're having our folks that are working on that actually interacting in the field, getting a better sense of what happens from a day-to-day experiences from an EMR and an EMT. And we're also looking at NEMSIS data, which is the frequency of which the types of encounters are experienced by EMS practitioners. And we'll be surveying several small focus groups as well as bigger cohorts of folks to get an understanding of the importance and criticality associated with that. So we're approaching this using some emerging and best practices in the testing and certification industry, taking advantage of technology and taking advantage of simply putting some of our folks in the back of an ambulance so they have an accurate understanding of what it is that's encountered by EMTs and EMRs on a routine basis. So we will be doing a survey that's coming out later this month and next month, and having a series of meetings and panels that will be meeting with folks, and other surveys that will be coming up, with the hope that by June of 2023, the updated BLS practice analysis will be available for review and final approval by the board. So a very exciting time, taking some improvements and best practices and applying them to our BLS practice analysis.
Because it largely before and days of old was just the survey, or largely the survey.
Correct. Yeah. And now with the advent of NEMSIS data, we can get the frequency of encounters very objectively and very accurately, which is what we did for our ALS practice analysis. And now we're able to apply that to our BLS.
All right, so we're at the point where we're going to do a last word. We have two guests. Everybody certainly gets a last word or two. So I'm going to let this go to you. The reason I do these last words is that people tend to remember what they hear last. I think this conversation is one that people can listen all the way to the end and learn all the way. So let's have you gentlemen wrap this up and tell me what's important and what you want to say.
Thanks, Dan. First of all, I want to thank you again for this opportunity to get a message out. We appreciate the platform and your partnership and willingness to do this. But first thing I want to drive home is the National Registry of EMTs values collaboration, partnerships, and feedback from all of our stakeholders, partner organizations, and from our individual providers as well.
And Dan, being here today with this opportunity on your podcast, so we're grateful for that, because it allows us to hopefully humanize a lot of this experience over the last couple of weeks, but also to reconnect those relationships, and perhaps even go so far as to reset some expectations that others have on the National Registry. And I'm grateful for that opportunity, and look forward to continued opportunities to do the same.
And as we talked about, there's a lot of positive things happening in EMS. There's growth in the EMS community right now. In a time when we need to see innovation, experience positive collaboration, and we seek to develop those stronger partnerships.
And with those partnerships comes dialogue, and sometimes they're honest, brutally honest conversations. And we look forward to that. We look forward to comments from everyone in the EMS community on certainly the issues we talked about today, but also on issues that relate to the competency of EMS practitioners. So the feedback of everyone in our community is valued and is essential.
And I guess last thing, Dan, would be that the 60-day comment period for the 13 resolution, we talked about the vast majority of this, the distributive education limits, all of our resolutions ends on August 17th. And so we would appreciate everybody to go to our website at nremt.org and make your voice heard. Let us know what you're thinking about this. And so that we can consider those things in the final resolutions. Thank you.
All right, so let's get those comments into the National Registry. If you get to the point where the summer's over, the decision is made on the resolution, you haven't commented, then that's on you. We have to have a voice in EMS. We crave a voice in EMS. We're having an opportunity where Dr. Kevin Mackey, the chair of the board of the National Registry, Executive Director Bill Seifarth from the National Registry, taking their time to share this information. You've thanked me. I am very grateful that you chose us to be able to do this. I've been in EMS for a long time, and I believe it's very important to give back. And this is a vitally important message. I'll end this with saying that I agree, regardless of what happens, we must move together as EMS, always do the best, not make things adversarial. It seems like traffic disputes and politics and everything can be pretty crazy. Let's avoid that here. Let's listen to what these gentlemen said, realize that these are difficult decisions, have your say, and make a difference. I want to thank you both again. The nature of these 7 Things podcasts are to get information out there, put it in bite-sized pieces, make it conversational, interesting. And I think that, gentlemen, you've done that for all of us today. And again, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you for listening to another Limmer Education Continuing Education podcast. For more podcasts that are relevant to your practice of EMS, limmereducation.com/7things.